Well, hello everyone. Thank you so much for joining. Looks like we have relatively small crowd here, which is really great because we'll be able to have a really good discussion. My name is David Myers. I'm the Executive Director of the Conservation Finance Alliance, and the CFA has been tasked to come up with an investment plan for the Global Fund for Coral Reefs. So it is my pleasure to be able to share with you information about the Global Fund for Coral Reefs, as well as our open current requests for information. And I'll go through a presentation. I'll hopefully give enough background information, and then we'll have about 30 minutes to do a question and answer. And so this is a meeting, not a webinar. You will be responsible for muting yourself. All your questions can go into the chat function, and then when I see questions there, I can call on you to unmute yourself, and then you can ask your question directly. We can have a conversation. And if you keep your questions relatively short, they'll have a chance that everyone can ask them. And so here we go. First off, if for some reason you're seeing the presenter view of the slideshow, let me know and I can switch screens, but I think it should be working well. You should see the Global Fund for Coral Reefs up there. The Global Fund for Coral Reefs is a project initiated by a range of partners who are listed here. It's an initiative that is quite innovative to try to address the challenge of coral reef loss and degradation and try to save coral reefs and the communities and support the communities that are dependent upon them. So I'm going to go through a real quick background here. Obviously, we could take a lot of time on this, but the risk with global warming and ocean acidification is that by somewhere in the next, perhaps the next decade, as much as 90% of the world's reefs will be threatened by human activities, and with 60% facing high or very high or critical threats. And as you probably are well aware, the oceans have absorbed 90% of the heat that the Earth has increased in the recent decades. So all that heat is going to the oceans. Coral reefs are not just the most diverse and amazing places on the planet, which harbor something around 30% of the ocean's biodiversity and less than 1% of the surface area. And this graph here shows that how millions of people are dependent upon coral reefs, how and where that dependency is sort of concentrated in certain areas. So it's less concentrated in some, more concentrated in others. And you won't be surprised to know that the funding available for coral reef conservation is much lower than what is needed, from what experts have estimated. And this Global Fund for Coral Reefs is seeking to fill that funding gap. And part of that funding gap is can be seen here is that 0.01%, so 1/10% of climate finance from development banks from 2010 to 2015 went to coral reefs. So it's really alarming how little is being spent on coral reefs, but we see this as a great opportunity. So as I mentioned, the partners and outreach to a range of organizations and individuals to think about whether a fund for a global fund for coral reefs would be a useful approach. It was decided yes. And the goals here of the fund are to unlock major investment towards coral reef conservation and restoration in developing countries, primarily, and also to facilitate the transformation of economies and livelihoods to reduce important drivers of coral reef degradation. So conservation, restoration, and avoiding degradation while at the same time supporting and enhancing the communities that are dependent upon those reefs. So the four outcomes here come from the Global Fund's theory of change. And the outcomes, the first one is to protect priority coral reef sites and climate change resilient refugia. The second, transformation towards sustainable livelihoods of reef dependent communities. This is really focusing on communities. The third one is coral reef restoration and adaptation technology. So trying to promote the technologies that achieve coral conservation and restoration. And fourth is recovery of coral reef dependent communities to major shocks. For example, large storms, health crises. So this is about resiliency, and it's focused on those communities. Now, the approach of the fund is somewhat innovative. It's really kind of focused on using the tools of conservation finance to achieve sustainable financing, sustainable conservation for coral reefs. And one of the main mechanisms here, and the sort of design of the fund is built around this, is blended finance. Blended finance has been defined by Convergence, as a group that focuses on blended finance, as the use of catalytic capital from public or philanthropic sources to increase private sector investment in sustainable development. And blended finance has mobilized over 140 billion to date, based on data that Convergence pulls together. So it's and it's been around for a while. We're only now sort of just talking about it as blended finance. So what is the fund doing with this focus? The idea is to identify and incubate project pipeline of revenue generating mechanisms, businesses, financial instruments. And the reason that we're looking for revenue generation is so that the private sector will find an interest in contributing and investing. And this greatly expands the power of the investments that the philanthropists and the bilateral state-based donors are able to provide. The fund can use concessional loans and guarantees, and will receive them perhaps, to de-risk investments and attract investment for Blue Natural Capital. Also to facilitate the uptake of innovative finance mechanisms, including private and market-based instruments. So looking at what kind of instruments, finance instruments can be used, again, with the goal of achieving the four outcomes, and unlocking finance for coral reef-related climate adaptation through the GCF, Adaptation Fund, and multilateral development banks. Now, again, if you remember back a few slides, very low levels of financing going to coral reefs for adaptation, and they're really, the reefs play a huge role in reducing wave height, reducing storm damage, and are absolutely essential. And then a final point here is that the fund is taking a systems thinking approach, thinking about coral reefs as part of the economic, social, cultural, and ecological ecosystem around, and sort of trying to focus our efforts on these systems so that the changes that we're seeking will occur. Really quickly, the way that the fund has been conceived and designed is that there should be roughly 125 million in donor funds, and this could include concessional financing, for example, from the Green Climate Fund, that would be managed through a grant manager. And then that would be complemented by around 375 million in partner assets that are deployed through a holding company. This would be more sort of the investment manager, right? And together that 500 million seeks to unlock an additional $2 to $3 billion of private financing and public financing through collaborations and partnerships for coral reef conservation. The goal here is to have an impact. So what are the current activities? This is the United Nations is leading the development of this, and in close collaboration with all of the partners here. And so a few activities are developing proposals for the UN Joint SDG Fund for blue economy, coral reef conservation in Fiji and Papua New Guinea. These are projects in development. This investment plan that I'll tell you more about in a few moments, that's being developed by the Conservation Finance Alliance to develop a 10-year vision. There's a green climate fund proposal for $100 million that's in development as well. This would be for concessional loans and guarantees that would help de-risk investments in blue natural capital. And de-risking is a great way of getting the private sector in. And then continued fundraising from member states and other private philanthropies. The private arm, the private investment folks are working on designing an investment window. And that's a collaboration with BNP Paribas and Ophelia Morova, and developing communication strategy and communication materials, such as a website and logos and things like that. So those are some of the current activities. Excuse me. Now, I'd like to move on to the role that the CFA is playing, which is developing this investment plan. And as part of that, we've released a request for information in collaboration with all the partners. We're seeking information on priority sites, important sites that have great potential for achieving all the goals, and for business models and finance instruments that support those sites. And the image here that I'm showing you is of a landing page that's on the Conservation Finance Alliance website. It has a lot of information, and if we have time at the very end, I'll just click on that and take you there. So first off, what is this investment plan? The investment plan is seeking to present a 10-year vision and strategy for the Global Fund for Coral Reefs to identify a potential investment portfolio, primarily as an example, to build understanding and engagement from partners, donors, and investors. And this will further the fundraising outcomes of the fund, and develop some initial programming guidelines for the implementation. And so to feed into this investment plan, we've set up 2 requests for information. These requests are online surveys, one on sites and the other one on business models or financial instruments. The 2 surveys can be reached at the website noted below here, conservationfinancealliance.org/Global Fund for Coral Reefs, GFCR. And it's accessible through the landing page. You'll be able to see there's links there. So let's start with the site selection piece here. Somewhat complex. We want to try to identify sites, and we're going to call them focal areas, where we're going to focus activities. The goal is to concentrate efforts that allows the piloting of innovative approaches and allows synergies to increase the chance of success. And so the focal area definition is a biogeographical unit where one or multiple investments are desired and are mutually reinforcing. So the site could contain multiple marine protected areas, multiple coral reefs that have an ecological connection, and certainly multiple business models, because those we do want to find reinforcing models. Ideally, the sites, the focal areas would be unified from both an ecological and an administrative point of view, but we are in the process of trying to refine what sites are and explore how certain finance mechanisms and approaches work on a very targeted area. Others work over a much broader area. And so the challenge here is to be able to use all the finance tools available. And so as a result, we're at this point keeping pretty flexible about the focal area. On the slide here is a picture of the Mesoamerican reef. It's a map that shows how the reef stretches from the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico through Belize, Guatemala, and Honduras. And ecologically, the Mesoamerican reef is one unified unit. However, it's in at least 4 different administrative domains, and it's very difficult from an investing point of view to make an investment in multiple countries at once. Once they have different rules, they have different regulations, and so would a site, would a focal area be the entire Mesoamerican reef? It's unlikely, but then again, there may be finance instruments that would work across the whole thing. In fact, the MAR fund itself is a finance tool that that works across the 4 countries, for example. So you know, the other possibility is that the focal area would be a very small area where we could concentrate efforts to have the impacts that are desired. And so we're in the process of exploring that. And as I mentioned, we may need to have some flexibility in terms of how large and how complex the focal areas are. This next is site selection criteria. These are general categories that are important that have been identified by the Global Fund for Coral Reefs Theory of Change and Terms of Reference. The Terms of Reference document, by the way, is available on the website. Very detailed document that you can download and have a read. Climate change resilience, top priority. It's important to try to identify and support those reefs that are going to act as refugia. Biodiversity, site readiness, and technical capacity. Does that exist on the ground? Are there partners there that can implement? Does the focal area align with national priorities and political alignment? Does the country support conservation of coral reefs in various ways? Ecosystem service values, including sites of significant cultural heritage, for example. The ability to monitor the impacts of the fund and what it achieves, and you know, the chance for a positive impact on local reef-dependent communities, and the potential to address the ecosystem degradation and the threats to coral reefs based on market-driven solutions. So that's these are some of the criteria for site selection. And in the request for information in the online survey, we're asking for a range of information that you can see here. And we're going to ask you for your contact information, because often we'll have to reach back out to get more information or to have a discussion about the area, country and location, obviously. The area of the site, we're asking you to define the area, you know, how large of a site is it? The local conservation activities, for example, is there a protected area there, a locally managed marine area? Who are the responsible actors, agencies? Designations and recognitions, for example, is it, are there Ramsar sites there? That kind of thing, World Heritage. Again, I mentioned biodiversity earlier. Drivers of degradation, what are the main drivers of degradation that are threatening the coral and the related ecosystems, such as mangroves and seagrass, which interact with coral to keep the coral ecosystems healthy. Bleaching history, how susceptible are they? Human presence, how near and populous is the human population? What's driving the local economy? Are there opportunities for tourism, things like that? And what are the existing business models or potential business models at that site? So this is the range of information we're asking for the site selection survey. And we're going to get to the business model in a second, but first off, we're asking you to review the drivers of degradation, and this is a relatively comprehensive list here. The goal is to identify which drivers we can address and which business models might address those drivers and reduce them. So we're asking to be, to try to clarify which of these drivers of degradation are affecting the reef. The fund obviously can't address all of them. Global warming is a challenge, and ocean acidification, of course, is a challenge much greater than what the fund is capable of impacting. So the fund will really try to focus as much as possible on the local conditions of the reefs, trying to make them as resilient as they can to the global trends of warming and acidification. The business model selection has also a different range of criteria here. The top one says impact on degradation drivers in coral reef protection. So this is the main goal. There's plenty of business models that are near coral reefs, and there's plenty of business models that may have harmful impacts on coral reef. What are the business models and finance instruments that can really support the conservation of coral reefs? If it's a blended finance mechanism, what's the overall ratio of grant to investment capital, for example? The target ratio is going to be 1 to 3 for the most part, as we're thinking about it now. Market analysis and financial sustainability. What is where are the revenues? Things like that. The potential for scaling up and replication, obviously very important. The scale issue is a real challenge, and we'll probably talk about that during the discussion. A lot of coral reef conservation actions are very local and very small scale. Some can be, positive revenue, return on investment, but they're so small, we need to figure out ways of scaling those up. The positive impact, not just on the reef, but on coastal and reef-dependent communities, and gender and social inclusion that's reflected in the business model and reflected in the implementation. So those are some of the criteria for the business model selection. The range of information we're asking in that survey is, again, we're asking for contact information. Here we're asking you to summarize the business model or the finance instrument. What does it actually do? Your personal or organization's experience, implementation history, describing the model into different categories, how this business or investment would align with stated outcomes of the Coral Reef Fund, the threats or the drivers of degradation that it addresses, the financing needs, how big or what's the scale, and your projected timeline, expected financial returns, if you know that information, and key partners. So it may be that you don't have that information, but where you do, we're hoping that you'll be able to fill that in and provide some ideas. And some of the different sectors and sort of types of business models that are worth looking at here could be ecotourism, sustainable fisheries, sustainable aquaculture, trying to reduce nearshore agricultural runoff, things like that, waste management, wastewater treatment for a lot of hotels and towns near adjacent to coral reefs, huge impact of untreated waste. And then a whole range of other opportunities, coral restoration, blue carbon seems to be an emerging possibility. How can we use that? Green infrastructure, things like that. So a lot of possibilities, and it's really up to us to try to be imaginative and identify those businesses that are positive, reef positive. Some of the, taking it from the kind of finance mechanism point of view, some finance mechanisms that have revenue streams that would work with this kind of model would be all the return-based instruments for the most part, everything from microfinance to private equity and debt, blue bonds, for example, things like that. Other economic instruments, it's possible that you could use taxes and fees and things like that for to engage the private sector in positive ways that generate sustainable revenue for the state, for a protected area, for example. Conservation businesses, obviously, insurance products. There's great innovation that's been occurring in that sector. Types of pay for success, blended finance, of course, and blended public-private partnerships. Just some initial possibilities. And I've got a couple more slides here, and then we'll wind down and to go to questions. So please think about questions you have, jot them down. You can put them down in the chat, and we can read through that. And okay, so should you submit a site survey or business model survey? So if you're doing active conservation in a certain area, a focus area, and there are multiple potential business or existing businesses, and maybe you're associated with a locality or municipality, and also it may be that there are multiple business models that need to interact to succeed. Then you probably want to do a site submission. If you are an existing or business, or or you're working in or thinking that about too many sites, or it's a model that would be relevant for multiple sites, you definitely could submit a business model survey. So up till now, we've had about 3 or 4 times as many site submissions as we have business models. So something to keep in mind. We're definitely interested in ideas on business models. And how might the fund ultimately finance these activities? Through a combination of grants and other mechanisms. The grant mechanism would be, again, target around 25% of the total expenditures. And the goal here would be to support a pipeline of viable investments that can use the blended finance and other mechanisms. Recoverable grants are possible, maybe even financing partners, such as incubators, other funds, or technical assistance facilities. We're exploring how that might work. Using concessionary finance itself, the fund could offer financial guarantees or low interest loans, things like that. And then, of course, debt instruments, loans, and equity instruments, or direct investments in companies. But there's others, and these are just some that are being explored. So finally, the website that we put up has a range of information, and well, I'm not going to click through, but the site is at conservationfinance.org/GFCR, and you can get to it in many ways. So please have a look at that site. There's this background information. There's frequently asked questions. There's all kinds of background, as I mentioned before, the actual theory of change for the fund, as well as this document that's called the Terms of Reference for the fund. Is a very detailed document. And on that, I am going to stop and thank you for listening. Apologize if that was a bit long, but we do have about a half an hour or so for questions. And how that is going to work is I'm going to look at what people have put in already, and then I'd like to, if I call on you, you can let me know that you could unmute your microphone and ask the question directly, or just somehow let me know that you'd rather me just read the question. Let's see. Starting off right at the top here. So. This is from George Cumming. Did you want to unmute yourself, George, and ask? You've had a few questions here.
I can do that, but it's just fine. Thank you, David, for all the information. You hear me okay?
Yeah, I hear you well.
Okay. Thank you for your time. And I'm thinking of how the first session that went whenever they announced the Coral Reef Fund, I'm surprised that there aren't more people here. They're missing out on some great stuff. But yeah, so let's see. I had a question about the definition of least developed countries from your perspective. I know the UN kind of has its own thing, but is this global fund going to follow that category? Or let me just ask it directly. Where do you put Mexico? Does it fall in the category that least developed funds could come there also?
My understanding is that one main criteria is going to be the Green Climate Fund, which uses the non-Annex 1 countries in terms of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. So a lot of terminology there, so basically, the Annex 1 countries are the countries that have, that are very developed and that are expected to sort of pay for the lesser developed countries,
right,
to address climate change mitigation and adaptation. So Mexico would fall into that's non-Annex 1 countries. So so yes, they would definitely be eligible under that. And for the most part, again, that I don't know the UN rules, but the idea here is also that you know, there's because it's private sector participation and investment. You know, I think that at some point, as we go forward, the fund should be able to offer opportunities of one form or another to you know all countries.
Yeah, well, that I agree with that, and I mean, in my little naive pea brain biochemistry coral knowledge way, when I got involved with the UN 4 years ago in the SDG4 ambassador program, I said, well, okay, I can't work on the barrier reef. That's where I started years ago, 30 years ago. But I said, you know what? I've been going to Cozumel and the Mesoamerican for about 30 years. I mean, the second largest reef on the planet. Is there something wrong with my thinking that we shouldn't be just absolutely putting, you know, Australia is more developed. The Great Barrier Reef has had tons of money put into it because it's #1 reef. But here's the second reef, and it's like less than a stepchild. So how do we turn that around for the second largest reef that really feeds the reef out to the Caribbean and feeds the reef even into the Gulf of Mexico flower gardens? That's all the same species of stuff, you know?
Yeah, well, I mean, the Mesoamerican reef is clearly one of the globe's you know most important reefs, reef systems, and definitely you know it's on our radar for the investment plan, and you know we're just trying to figure out, as I showed from the you know pictures, sort of how to address that. It's a big system, four plus countries, I think, and
yeah, at least four. I'd say
right.
6.
Yeah. So and yeah, so real very important, and again, that's why the fund is focusing on more on developing countries, if you will, rather than the developed world. I mean, yeah, I agree. Australia, you know, the Great Barrier Reef is super important, and Australia seems to be putting money into it to support it, whether that's going to be enough or not.
The planet has put money into it because it's so big. You know, I mean, it had the notoriety, whatever, you know, right place, right time, whatever you want to call it.
Right.
But they've gotten the attention. Anyway,
Great. Well, thank
that's
you,
all
George.
encouraging. It's all encouraging because that's why I asked the question. Because you're private sector, you can do what you want to do because it's private sector money, more or less.
Well, this is a blended fund. So yeah, so there's public money and philanthropic money, and it all is going to be, you know, very strongly coordinated to maximize the impact, so that the public money and the philanthropic money is leveraged and creates the greatest impact possible. Yeah. That's the plan.
Well, I look at this list of 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 people that I know myself. You're going to be getting some applications for sure soon for the Mesoamerican.
Okay. Excellent. Yeah. Look forward to that. Great. Well, let's thank you, George. And we're going to move on to Arya Ma. If you would like to unmute yourself and ask your question, you're more than welcome to.
Thanks for the presentation. It's really great resources. I just happened upon the website like while doing some research on funds. So I'm with an organization that is looking to create coral stainless steel sculptures that double as super coral nurseries and additional revenue streams to get tourists away from, you know, coral reefs, and rather using these as a supplement for, you know, companies that or organizations on land that have, you know, scuba diving expenditures. So I was wondering if that would count as a business model, if that would be something that we would fill out.
So first response, yes. We'd love to hear, you know, what you're doing. For a business model, one of the key elements is your revenue stream, right? So, you know, how, you know, maybe this is currently funded through grants and development, but, you know, could you, you know, does the hotel pay you for the services? Is that something that's viable? Can that be scaled up? Is there a business in that? Does that make sense?
Right. Yeah. So what we're planning right now is the money doesn't come towards us, but the money is supposed to be generated. So, for example, the hotel has, you know, that package for a tourist that they would get some of the funds, and then the rest would go back into local coral reef conservation efforts. So it would go back into whether or not it was the diving organization that's helping, you know, harvest the coral after it's grown and then replanted, or whatever other organization locally there that's helping with the coral reef restoration.
Mm-hmm. Great. Yeah, I think around ecotourism and coral restoration, there's going to be a whole range of interesting potential businesses and business models and sustainable finance approaches. So we'd love to hear about what you're doing. Please do a business model survey.
Great. Sounds
That'd be
good.
great.
Thank
yeah.
you.
Thank you. Next question from Cedric Rubio.
Hi.
I said that right.
Good. I'm the executive director for the Reef Restoration and Adaptation Program in Australia, so very aware of George's comments here. And just to say that what we're doing here, and that's why I'm asking these very high-level questions. It's a research and development program, very, very, very strong intent to raise philanthropic and capital, generally corporate investments for an additional probably $200 million to this program. And through the Great Barrier Foundation and the partners. So we're obviously very interested in seeing how we can leverage the existing investments we have and work with others. What we're doing is developing technologies that we think will be able to help any reef. We're fully aware of the global nature of that problem. So in that sense, I was just trying to understand a little bit more about a couple of things. I have two questions. I might just bundle them. Is what are the definitions around revenues, and whether direct investment from partners, in-kind investment from corporates through technology, how does that apply? And the second one is, what is your time horizon? Because we're looking clearly within this program at developing new industries and developing new models for distributed, for example, agriculture, or all sorts of community-driven initiatives and employment pathways for traditional owners, especially, that could be used to scale up this model in the future. So while it's not happening now, we're working to enable that. So really interested to see how the fund is looking at this.
Right. Well, Cedric, thank you so much for joining and for your questions. And probably would be worth having a conversation, subsequent conversation in more depth.
Yes.
So we should be in touch. So the sort of focus on revenue is, the way I look at it is it's the raw material, if you will, for business models or finance instruments. It's easier to pay a loan back if you've got revenue coming in. Now there's both financial returns that you could generate revenue for, but there's also economic returns, and there's finance instruments that a government could use, like a sovereign bond, for example, that does return money to the investors, but it's guaranteed by the country, and the country is benefiting from its investment in coral reefs, for example, from economic returns. So, well-being of the population, general economic growth, reduced risk from storm damage, things like that. So that's a way to capture those larger social benefits of coral reef conservation, but also still having a finance instrument that investors could be excited about. And again, it's about trying to leverage money, get that money flowing towards coral reef conservation. It's challenging. I think it's really challenging to come up with sort of revenue, really good revenue models that are beneficial and positive to the coral reefs. And that's what we're looking for from all of you, ideas on what you've seen works, projects that you're developing, and opportunities that you see coming down the line. And just quickly, as far as, so I probably didn't answer your first question very well, but the timing one I can probably answer a bit better, which is we're out there building this investment plan right now. The partners are out there, we're talking to other partners and trying to build up the especially donation part of the fund that could be as much as 25 million. That would be complemented by the Green Climate Fund proposal, which is being developed for about 100 million. And so that, this could take a year before that concessional funding is available. I think that's a general timeline. But there could be a range of other financing that's available in the shorter term. So sometime in 2021 is the expected beginning of distribution. There'll probably be calls for proposals, during that time. But I couldn't tell you specifically, what month or what quarter to be expecting that.
Luke, thank you. I think the tension between, smaller projects that we can find a business model for straight away versus the ability to implement things that we believe are scalable and sustainable long-term, for example, adaptation, is looking at a much longer time frame. And so it'd be interesting to discuss that. But Luke, thanks for your answers, and I'm very happy to continue the conversation offline if you want.
Great, let's do that for sure. Thanks.
Thank you.
Great, so moving on to Isabel, Bunnyman. Question is, Isabel, do you want to unmute yourself?
Sure. So I had two questions, unrelated. The first of which is, are you all considering reefs that are only within national jurisdictions? So I know that there are mesophotic, so deeper coral reefs on the high seas. And my second question is, how has, if at all, has COVID-19 and the impacts of the pandemic, so, most places are projecting reduced tourism for the near future, affect your thinking about financial model sustainability and the types of financial models being proposed and their competitiveness? Thank you.
Thank you. Great questions. As far as, reefs out there in the open sea, that I know there's a group working on large scale marine protected areas, for example. And that might be more appropriate for that financing. That's a project that Conservation International is involved with, as well as partners at Pew, I believe. And I don't think it fits with the sort of model for this fund, but I'm not the person to judge. I'd have a hard time finding a business model associated with that. Especially where there's lack of clarity on management responsibility and access. So that's a tricky one. Important, but tricky. So I'm stumped on that one. And of course, the downturn in tourism has been, it's global, touching everywhere. And tourism has been a really important source of financing for conservation for years. And, so many protected areas get their unrestricted budget, let's say, from tourism entrance fees. It should be noted that governments, cover a lot of protected area management costs. And, they're on through their national budgets, but a lot of the extra money and a lot of the freedom to make investment and financing decisions comes from that tourism money. It's been a horrible blow to many protected areas around the world, both terrestrial and marine. So, how does that change our view about financial model and sustainability? It just reinforces the point of view that you need a mix of finance solutions for resilience for any organization, and especially a protected area. And tourism, of course, has been growing historically. It's a great source of financing. It can be, if it's well managed, very compatible with conservation. And but this global shock is clearly forcing organizations to realize they needed financial reserves, where possible for this kind of thing. It's just, the fact that it's happened, across the board globally has been, there's no place that has not been affected by this, and there's no place where it hasn't been damaging to the protected area management, for example. Anyway, that's but no, diversify your sources. You know, you can't rely on one source, whether it's government budgets or whether it's tourism entrance fees. You know, it's great if you have a conservation trust fund or something that has an endowment that can still support the conservation projects and things like that. Very important to have diversity of sources. So just really reinforce that aspect, that need for a mix. Was that good enough? Did you have a follow-up question, Isabel?
No, that's great. And it's also interesting to hear, you know, a lot of it's funding or supporting conservation models that involve endowments or trust funds can be hit or miss in terms of what how the various financing rules for other people who may want to invest in an area. So that's also very helpful to hear that you all are open to sites that do have endowments or trust funds. So thank you.
Very much. They've actually lent quite a fair amount of stability, I would say, in some crisis areas. So thanks. We had a question from Stephen.
Hi guys. Hi David. Yeah. Thanks very much for your time, and George, Attila, Anya, and Scarlett. It's great to see many faces in here. So my question was, beyond the funding, this is obviously very interesting, but are there also networks available in this fund and in this pool for things, in particular for robotics and automation technologies? A bit of context is I've been working on a coral husbandry automated raceway machine, or CHARM. Basically, you imagine a gantry system that fits on top of a coral raceway to allow for help in feeding, fragging potentially, and definitely with monitoring. It's been a COVID project for me, and something I've noticed really quite interestingly is as COVID has impacted manufacturing, a lot of countries are starting to take away their manufacturing industries from China and moving them to different locations. And it's proved a bit of a difficult challenge trying to figure out how to get these materials sourced from the right places. And I'm currently in Australia, in Townsville, but I've got a small nonprofit that's trying to work out of in Mexico. So I'm very interested in a global supply chain approach. Do you guys have industry networks that are particularly helpful for machines and supply chain?
We do not, but I'd be very interested in learning more about what you're doing and seeing if I can make some connections, because the Conservation Finance Alliance, we're a network, we're an alliance, and so we do have some interesting contacts that might be useful for you, apart from the Coral Reef Fund. But the fund itself does not have, has not set up any kind of networks like that. However, you know, if you remember, one of the outcomes was focused on technology, and so there's very likely that part of what the fund will do will be to figure out a way to support emerging technologies for coral restoration and conservation. So so it's, you know, likely that kind of network will evolve. It just hasn't been established yet.
Okay.
But do you know of one? I mean, if you do, email me. I'm gonna share an email with everyone, which is the Secretariat, and this is the CFA Secretariat. And if you have questions or contacts or anything about the Coral Reef Fund or anything that we've talked about, please don't hesitate to email the Secretariat, and we will get back to you on that. So so please send me this information, or fill out a business model, because that sounds like, you know, at this point it's research and maybe, you know, funded by nonprofit or yourself or whatever, but it sounds like there's potential for business opportunity there. You know, where you have efficiency, where you have, you know, improving over existing methods, and, you know, opportunities for large scale impacts, definitely please submit a business model survey.
Okay.
Great. We have a few more minutes, so if anyone you know, has questions or even wants to share something that they're working on, that would be more than welcome.
Well, if you're going to open it up, I was sitting here. I didn't want to dominate, but I got a great one for you. I think
I'm sure everyone would like to hear it, George. So please.
It's how are we going to convince the people? I mean, you know, Paul and Bill and all these people. I mean, I'm so fortunate I got to meet them, and the sad loss. These people with money, they're doing the right thing. But how do we get a billion of the billionaires now? How do we get them understanding, and government leaders just understanding one thing? Whatever the budget is today to fix the ocean, this is kind of like what's that clicking top, the interest on our money here in America, right? Just is ratcheting up. It's the same thing, isn't it, David? Tomorrow, the cost to fix the ocean, the air, everything is more expensive because the problem gets deeper and broader. And so it's going to take it, and it's an additive. We're just still adding. So the budget to clean it up in 5 years, astronomical. It's already astronomical. Just at this stuff, you know, trillions and trillions of dollars. How do we get that? We're just, I mean, it doesn't take a great spreadsheet view. You know, don't look at this quarter, this month. Let's look 10 years, 100 years. The cost, it won't even be possible. And some of this stuff, once we lose a species, it's gone forever. We are in a time crisis. So how do we get those two absolute, just common horse sense facts to the people with money and the people leading us to make the policy changes? And let's get off dead center.
Yeah. Well, yeah, you know, absolutely. And, you know, it's not just coral reefs, but coral reefs are really, in a way, the canary in the coal mine here. This same sort of destruction that we're seeing with bleaching and loss of coral reefs is going to happen with most other ecosystems on the planet. So this is a general question. I think that it's interesting. Here's my take on it, that for example, global fossil fuel subsidies have been estimated to be, you know, over $500 billion a year. Other kinds.
You're am I muted? You're not muted or something, David. We lost you.
Coral reefs and farces
Yeah,
and such. I think my headphones may have died. They are also huge amounts of money. Subsidies for fisheries, which results in overfishing, are order of you know, several around 28, $30 billion a year.
Yeah.
And what the problem is that if we could just stop subsidizing harmful activities, that would be a good start. The second piece to that is that we have to understand, you know, how to work with private business to align their interests, because private business is just designed in a way to make money. That's how we designed it. They're doing fine, but they're not designed to be the protectors of our ecosystems. And so we have to figure out how government and private sector interact in ways that align the interests of the private sector. And a lot of these finance tools can be used for that. So yeah, the costs are just going to go up and up and up. So we really need to stop the destruction, stop the damage, and this reduce the drivers of loss. And that's what we're focused on, the drivers here a lot, as well as conservation and pure conservation. And the challenge is, you know, we need to work with government. We need to work on regulations. We need to work on enforcement. It's a system change that is needed. And so, oh yeah.
Well,
big changes are needed. We need to convince the politicians. We need to convince, even companies, that can talk to governments and say, no, we're okay with regulations as long as it's a level playing field and everyone plays by the same rules.
yeah,
And we can get an enormous amount done. And I'm actually heartened. I mean, I know it's massively challenging, but I'm heartened by the interest of groups like, the World Economic Forum and large investment banks and
Yeah.
things like that are starting to wake up to realize how important natural capital is. And,
Agreed.
How important it is for their investments. And so, unfortunately it's coming a bit late, but I do think that there's progress there. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, well, another piece is at least coral is one of the things that's doable.
We're out on time, but I've got a request from Zoltan to
go for it,
say a few
Zoltan.
words. So you're welcome to say a few words. If you have to unmute your microphone now.
Can you hear me? I unmuted my.
I can't hear you, unfortunately.
You cannot hear me.
Zoltan,
You're
if
really
you can
quiet.
hear me and you can unmute your microphone, let us know.
On the wrong microphone.
Otherwise, Shelby Thomas has asked to say a few words. Shelby, you want to unmute your microphone?
Yeah, so Zoltan, I'm not sure if you could hear that. Your mic was just really, the sound was down, it appeared. But if you don't mind.
I can't hear anything.
Can you? Okay, so I'll go ahead. Hi, my name's Shelby. I'm the Director of Research for the Ocean Rescue Alliance. We're an artificial reef nonprofit. We work with different marine conservation and restoration, and we implement a lot of different innovative techniques to restore marine environments. Us, similar to Aria, as she mentioned earlier, we build a lot of different artificial reef structures that incorporate art and also memorial reefs to bring awareness. And we implement the Coral Lock, which is a device created to increase coral outplanting efficiency. One of our ways, we just recently partnered with CRF and Seacorps International to start testing some of our outplanting on natural reefs. And I stepped in late to this presentation, but did you guys have any specifics as far as different areas you were wanting to focus on restoration, or essentially anyone can apply for different areas?
Right, great question. The fund and the investment plan, we're trying to identify focal areas where we would concentrate efforts. That being said, and those will be primarily for initial pilot work. There ultimately will be, calls for proposals. They may be focused geographically, or they may be open. It's hard to say at this point.
Okay, great. Yeah, we're looking to work with different groups. Actually, working with a few different people in the group as well. But we are interested in engaging different reefs, as well as in Barbuda and throughout Florida.
Great. Well, please submit some of those sites in, or submit a business model proposal. And thank you so much. Yeah.
Thanks.
It looks like Zoltan, I'm sorry I couldn't hear you before. My speakers were not working. But you wanted to say a few words before we close off? Zoltan, over to you. Okay, I see you're unmuted, but I can't hear you. So maybe there's something wrong with your microphone. Okay, well, I think that we've reached the end of the time here. I want to thank all the partners of the Global Fund for Coral Reef for supporting this initiative. It's really great. The Conservation Finance Alliance is thrilled to be involved with it and to be working on the investment plan, and thrilled to be working with you, and look forward to all your ideas and the different sites that you're proposing. And Zoltan, I'm very sorry that the microphone didn't work, but yes, please reach out to the email that I posted, secretariat@cfalliance.org. And again, thanks everyone for participating in this webinar and for all your interest and all your efforts for coral reefs globally.
Thank you, David.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks everyone.